Lucky you.
36 best
Tuned
holes in
into
golf.
Alternate Shots podcast,
Barney's Army.
where we talk about golf,
Sandy.
poker,
James Bond.
horse racing,
Double.
classic movies.
Zenyatta.
We have no script.
Down the stretch they
And
come.
we are glad you joined us.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
Hey, Billy Regan, we are so thrilled. Today, we have a celebrity, and I don't mean just in golf, in so many areas. He's had such a life and has only lived half of it. I know he's got another half in front of him.
I
We're
do.
thrilled to have Billy Harmon on the podcast. Billy, so thrilled to have you here.
I'm very
Wingfoot
grateful to be
royalty.
here. We were originally members of Wykagyl. And so Dad would let us come over play on Mondays, was caddy day back then. And so I can remember maybe 9 or 10 playing on Mondays. When Dad finished third in the Open in '59, I was only 8. So I was upset that he didn't win. I realize now him finishing third in the Open at age 43 with 6 kids as a host pro might have been a greater feat than winning the Masters, to be honest with you. But so my memories kind of started then, I would say 8, 9 years old.
8, 9 years old. And
were you playing already?
Oh yeah, I was playing. Yep, I can remember we would go in and get a brown cow or something at the turn, and I realize now the bartender probably hated us because he had to go in the kitchen to get the ice cream and stuff.
Scoop of ice cream.
Looking back on it, I bet he hated seeing the little Harmon kids come in there on Mondays.
Are you the youngest of the brothers?
I am, yeah. Butch and I have the same birthday. We're 7 years apart. How about that, huh?
Yep. Was it Bob? Who was the
Bob
pro?
Watson.
Bob Watson gave me my first set of clubs, about 7
Yeah,
clubs.
the pro, yeah.
I was over at Siwano making bets for brown cows on the putting green when we were 7 or 8 years old.
What a great era in golf we grew up in, huh? I think, looking back on it, Butch was a little bit older, but Craig, Dick, and I seemed to play in a lot of tournaments in the summers, the Westchester Juniors, Westchester Amateurs, Met stuff. So it seemed like we were all playing in tournaments. It seemed like all the time. I'm sure had to drive Dad nuts, because he was footing all the bills and all that stuff. So we were always playing, it seemed like. And I think as I got a little bit older, Craig, Dick, and I were probably very close in competitively, I would say. We were all about the same. And so the matches were even. There wasn't anybody giving strokes or anything like that, and a lot of needles. But I think we just loved to play, and I think we learned that at Wykagyl, and then Wingfoot is probably where the love of the game really hit us. I remember talking to Jay Haas one time, and he loves Wingfoot. Jay played in his first U.S. Open in '74. And he's the only guy that's made the cut in the '74 Open, the '84 Open, the '97 PGA, and the 2006 Open, which is a pretty cool little tidbit. But he said the thing that always got him about Wingfoot was that when you were driving to the course, there wasn't one shot or one hole that scared you to death, because you could swing at it. And a recovery shot at Wingfoot was a recovery shot, because there really are no hazards, to speak of. And you'd have to really hit a bad shot to get one out of bounds. And so Wingfoot, to me, allowed you to play golf. And if you were a real good player, it was more of a bogey course than a double bogey course. It would just kind of wear you out, but there were no penalty shots. And so to me, it was just golf.
Well, you mentioned Jay. I was lucky enough to get Jay's uncle, Bob Golby, in the Open into the lottery.
Oh my God.
And Billy, it's interesting because the first day I didn't get a bag, and Gene Hayden as well as I
Oh
do.
God.
And I went up to him later in the day. Sit down. Your name's you're in the hopper in the locker room. Just sit down and shut up. The next day came around until about 11, 12 o'clock. There's only 8 guys left. Bob Golby was one of the 8. And Nicholas didn't come out either because he did his prep the month before.
That's right, he did. Yeah, it was his.
So he didn't have to be there Monday, right? He came in Tuesday or whatever.
Yeah.
So Bob picked me, but I had the greatest time learning from Bob. And that Wednesday, he said, we're going to play with Jay Haas. So he takes a 5-iron out on 7. It was a stout hole, 165, 70, maybe into a little wind, puts it in the hole.
Jay did?
Jay held out on that 7th hole.
How about that, huh?
You had a hole in one?
Very unlikely. I wonder how many have been made on 17 East, you know?
I have one.
Do you really?
Yeah,
How about
I have
that?
4 in my life and one of them's on 17 East.
Yeah, my only one at Wingfoot was on 3 East and it carried.
I
in the
have one
hole
there
on the
too,
fly.
yeah.
It went
Those are
in
my
on the
2.
fly, 8-iron, big old flyer, you know. Great holes, probably the 8 best par threes on one piece of property.
No,
in
no
history
question.
of golf, in my opinion.
If you had to make a par on any one of the 8th holes, you had to make it for a big sum of money or for your life or whatever the bet is. Which would you choose?
I'd say 3 East would be the easiest for me.
I agree with that.
Yeah, but other than that, I think the other 7, I don't know. I don't think I'd want to have to make a par on one of those for any great.
No, because if you miss the green on those, you got all kinds of.
Yeah, you're
difference.
all kinds of, but 3, you know, it's just a little more receptive and a little shorter. 13 is, my father used to say it's a hard 3 and an easy 5. So
Yeah, yeah.
I
Bobby.
tell people it's easier to hit 13 in 1 than 2.
that's a very good line there. That's very true, by the way. And I remember as a kid, I'm not going to mention the member's name, but he was a very classic member at the time. And I was playing with he and his wife, and we were playing 13 East, and his wife was a beginner, and she hit it in the bunker on 13. And if the member was smart, he would have just told her to take it out of the bunker, because as a good player, it's hard to get it on the green. So a beginner literally had no chance. And he kept telling her to open the face of the wedge. And she didn't know what that meant. And she wasn't doing it. And after about the 4th time, she told him to shut up with a bad word somewhere in the middle of that. And the member said, "You opened the wrong face." I don't want to mention the guy's name, but I bet you guys could guess who it was, you know. So
Oh,
You could tell us after we go off.
I will tell you.
Yeah.
He said you opened the wrong face. I think they were divorced within the next year. I was about 14 years old. I was in shock when he said it.
Why
Oh, yeah.
why do holes like that bother the 10 or 12 handicap golfer in particular?
Well, there's no margin for error, for one. I mean,
Exactly,
you've got to
yep.
hit a beautiful golf shot on that hole. And if you, let's say, take the correct club and push it, you're not going to carry to let's say what we'd call the front right edge now. So you're going to hit in the bunker, and then you never want to go down left. And so there's a lot of things that you don't want to do on that hole. And I think that interference affects everybody's swing, including mine. It's just a great hole. And it's too bad they don't make more holes like that in golf nowadays. The game is such a power game. But I bet if you had a US Open on 13 East, I bet it would be easily in the top 10 hardest holes on the
Right.
course.
Absolutely.
When the week was over, maybe even higher than that.
Oh yeah. Well, I saw Mike Gilmore on the tee one time during some outing, and he was sitting, every group would come through. I said, "Mike, what are you hitting?" He said, "Well, I can hit a wedge here, but if I hit the wedge, it comes all the way back off." So
Right.
I'm hitting this little chip 9. What does he mean by when he's saying hit a chip 9?
Just a 3/4 shot. First mistake he was picking that hole to be hitting a shot on. He should've been on 3
Yeah.
East, so he's a dumb SOB in that regard. I don't know. I might even want to, take a front tee on 6 East or something before I'd go to 13 East, even with a wedge. So no, he was probably just talking about a 3/4 shot, and he's a darn good player. So if he's struggling with it on his home course, you can imagine how hard that hole is.
Yeah, there's just nowhere to miss it.
Nope, you got to either hit a good shot or you make 5.
So I don't know if we want to cover this now, but Bobby Christie was on, and maybe you had a chance to see his.
I haven't
content.
seen him yet. I'm going to watch him when I get through with you guys.
He was
That's it.
talking about his record with you.
He's 2-0. He beat me in the junior championship. I think I shot 72 qualifying, and he shot 85. And then he beat me in the club championship, I think the year after I won it. I think he actually might have beaten me in the first match. And, you know, I think I beat him by about 20 shots in the qualifying there, but he had my number. He did. He's 2-0. I gotta eat crow, boy. I mean,
Well, he said he was
Oh, he
7
loves
up
it
on you
too.
going to the back.
Pardon me?
He said he was, I think he said was 7 up on you going to the back.
I made a comeback. He ended up beating me 1 up on both of them, as I recall. And he never misses an opportunity to bring it up. And if I were him, I would do it even more than he does it to me. So no, that's obviously one of my memories. The Christie family was a great part of our lives there. My dad loved Bobby and Neil and Jeannie like he loved his own kids. So, and they seem to really, really love my father. They have Bobby and Neil 2 or 3 times a year will just out of the clear blue sky write me a wonderful text about how nice my dad was to him and how generous he was. So that's kind of neat that that's the memory that they have of him.
Yeah,
He was probably nicer to them than he was to Butch and I, but Butch and I deserved whatever we got.
Yeah.
Craig and Dick were saints, but Butch and I kind of pushed the envelope a little bit.
The bookends.
Yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
I'm one of 4 brothers also, and we had quite a time on the golf course, especially my brother Neil and I. We played thousands of rounds together.
You know, we played in November. Craig and Butch and I played Augusta. And after dinner one night, we went up into the champion's locker room, and we sat by Dad's locker, and we actually kind of got emotional, you know, thinking that this year will be Dad's 75th anniversary of his win. And we were thinking about how cool it was. Butch is 79, Craig 76, I'm 72, and we're sitting by our dad's locker in the champions room, and we're emotional. And we sat there for about 2 hours and we reminisced. Then another member came in with his 3 guests, and then another member came in. And I don't know, we just kept telling stories. And it was like 2 hours later, and I don't think anybody had said a word other than the 3 of us. And I saw one of the members the next morning, and I apologized. I said, God, we kind of took over up there, you know. And the guy said, when my 3 guests got back to the cottage, they turned to me and said it was the 2 greatest hours they ever spent in golf. So
I can imagine that.
Yeah, so it was kind of interesting because the next week I went down to the TaylorMade place here in Carlsbad to get fitted for clubs, and Scotty Scheffler was there. And I don't know Scotty. And I'm just growing up in the family that I grew up in, I've learned to leave celebrities alone. But I actually wanted to tell him the story of us being in that locker room, and for him to imagine that his kids that aren't even born yet, 80 years from now, might sit in that locker room by their dad's locker and say, my dad won the Masters. Because you can't imagine that when you're a kid. You know, you can't imagine even what it meant to us. I mean, we got choked up about it, you know, and we ended up talking about Dad and Winged Foot and everything. And Craig said something very interesting. I said, I have a picture of Dad played with Hogan the last round of the Open in '59. And it's a picture taken probably from the front right of the tee. So it was Hogan in his follow through. You saw the clubhouse in the back was beautiful. And Dad was there leaning on his club. I now know that Dad shot 70 and beat Hogan by 6 shots, finished 3rd, lost by 2. And I tried to imagine any other club pro in the world that could have done that. Let's say they were on the last tee with Tiger Woods with a chance to win the Open, and they were going to beat Tiger by 6. And I thought about how comfortable he must have been, you know, to do that, because he was 43 or 4 years old. He wasn't playing in any tournaments. And Craig said something interesting. I'd never heard this. He said, well, Dad must have thought he was one of them.
Right.
So when he played with Hogan or Snead or some of the better players, he knew that they were, you know, better than him for the most part. But he didn't think that if he played good, he couldn't beat him, you know. So he must have felt that I'm kind of one of them.
He was one of them.
He was, as it turned out, but a story that will add to that is Craig Wood told me that when he hired Dad, he asked my dad, what type of player you want to be? And he said, well, I want to be like you. And we called him Uncle Craig. And Uncle Craig said, Well, the way you hold on to the club and that snap hook you hit, you won't get out of Westchester County. And so my dad, which was true, he said, well, I love the game. I'll do whatever it takes. And Craig Wood said, yeah, well, a lot of people say that, but when the improvement doesn't come right away, they'll retreat back to what feels good. And he said, your father got mad at me and said, I'll do what it takes. And so he did do what it took. And then I also have a photo in my office at the club of the very first Masters Champions dinner. It was called the organization meeting. It's written on the, and Dad is, they've got all the champions and Bobby Jones and Cliff Roberts, and Dad is standing up and Craig Wood and a few other guys are kneeling down in this picture. And Craig, just by coincidence, was kneeling under Dad. So I said to Dad one time, did you ever needle Uncle Craig about him telling you that you weren't going to be any good? Now you're at the champions dinner with him at Augusta. And Dad said, yeah, I needled him. I named my second son Craig Wood Harmon, because had Craig Wood not told me the truth, I'd have never been any good. And think of that lesson nowadays. You know, if an older guy tells a young person the truth, we get him thrown in jail for abuse. So his feeling was that because Craig Wood leveled with him and that he did love the game and he did work at it, he said, I needled him. I named my son Craig Wood Harmon.
That's incredible. What I learned here, Billy Regan, is that you win a tournament at Augusta, you've got a locker room beyond your life. It's forever, right?
Unbelievable. And to think that, you know, we sat there and I don't know why the three of us got very choked up. And I mean, it was a beautiful choke up. It wasn't, it had great meaning to us. And I don't know, we might realize at our age, we might never, you know, be there again, the three of us and stuff. And God, if I played as bad as Craig and Butch played, I wouldn't take my game to Bonnie Breyer, more or less.
Well, the other thing I love is that I think a lot of Scotty Scheffler. I think he's a great talent where he came from, and using your word, talent, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who would teach somebody to swing at the driver and their footwork is like Fred Astaire? His talent, right?
Well, I think it also is a great tribute to his coach, Randy Smith in Dallas, who teaches a lot of good players, and he doesn't get enough credit for it. Because in many ways, he's a lot like Butch. He doesn't change. That's what we were brought up. I tell people all the time that our father, I always thought Dad was kind of an uneducated genius. He just saw the world through a different lens. And he would tell us that when you work with a good player, figure out why their swing works, not what's wrong with it, because they wouldn't be good if they had a bad swing, see? And in the Anderson, there was a guy, I think he was from Long Island. He was the most unlikely looking good player you ever saw. Hit all these big swinging hooks out there. My dad loved to watch him play. His name was Gene Francis.
Yes.
And he had his own little swing, and he was a little guy, didn't look athletic at all. And he was the one guy my father loved to watch in the Anderson. And I said, why do you like watching him? He said, because I saw him hit it stiff to the back right pin on 8 West with a hook one day.
Wow.
He said, and that's humanly impossible to do. So he had so much talent. So Dad would love watching talent. And when I would go out and sit in the cart with him and watch him, he'd say, now here's a guy that you should never change his swing, because he hits every shot the same. And so I think we didn't really know it at the time that we were going to be teachers. But if you look at Dustin Johnson, you know, Butch didn't change that bowed left wrist because our father had a bowed left wrist. So you can't tell if you go to a tour event who Butch teaches, because he doesn't have a system, you know. Other teachers, other players, you can say, you know, Sean Foley teaches this guy, or Hank Haney teaches that guy, or Ledbetter taught this guy. But the foundation and the groundwork was put into place by Claude Harmon. And I'm sure he learned a lot of this stuff from Craig Wood. So it all started, you know, I've said it a million times that if Craig would have never hired Claude Harmon in 1941, the only place you'd have ever read our names was in the phone book. Everything started for the Harmon family that day And we really owe everything that I don't know what we've achieved in golf. Sometimes I sit back in the audience and I look at what's happened. Dad and Butch and Craig and Dick, I don't know what the hell I've contributed. And I kind of just go, wow, this is really cool. You know, this is a body of work that is really remarkable, but it's all Winged Foot to me, you know. And so I would like to think if you guys were sitting in the grill room watching a tournament and they mentioned Butch's name or Craig or mine, and you were sitting with a couple guests, you turn and say, those are our guys.
Absolutely.
Bottom of my heart, I want you to say, those are our guys, because we are your guys. And we've tried to conduct ourselves in a manner that the Winged Foot people would be proud of us. Butch and I were a little lacking when we were younger on that part.
Well, at least in public.
And so we've always tried to, you know, I'm old enough now and I have such a great life, and I've had a great life in golf, as you guys have alluded to. I know for a fact, you know, when I went back for the Open, this is a funny story. I talked to Mark Loomis, and he agreed to hire me to announce the Open in 2020, because I told him nobody knows the place and loves it like me, and I don't choke in front of a camera. And so the first time in the history of televised sports, they changed networks 6 weeks before the tournament. It's never happened. Can you imagine a Super Bowl? It's never happened.
Crushing.
So I had my shortest announcing career ever. So I still wanted to come back because I love Winged Foot, and I figured it might be the last Open, you know, while I'm alive. And I called JP and he said, I said, can you get me tickets? He said, Bill, it's COVID. No one can't, no gallery. I said, oh God, that's right. He said, but if you volunteer, would you volunteer? I said, yeah, I just want to be there. So the first day I was a spotter on 4 West. I was a starter in the practice rounds. That was cool.
Yep.
And then I was right behind the green on 10 West on Friday, and my replacement didn't come. So I was there from 6 in the morning till whenever. Then 14 West, I was right by the green. Then I caddied for Mike Gilmore because he played with Abraham Ancher. Because
I saw you. I saw you
guy,
go
Danny
out
Lee, 6 putted the 18th hole
and down the road.
And so when Mike asked me to caddy, I got in touch with Craig and Butch. You guys wouldn't know this, but Dad made a 40-footer on the last hole on that Winged Foot to finish 3rd, playing with Hogan. And I don't know where came over me, but I told him I'm going to be on the 18th green tomorrow, and I'm going to go to that place. I know where it was, and I'm going to tip my hat to my dad and my mom and Dick. So what a coincidence. You know, I was devastated that I couldn't announce. And then by Sunday, I'm standing where Dad made the putt in 1959, and I tip my hat to the 3 that are no longer with us. And we went in the Mike's office, and he says, let's go out and watch the rest of the tournament. And I said, no, I'm out of here. This has been the greatest week of my life. What just happened out there was so unplanned. You couldn't plan it. But somebody asked me why I came back to volunteer. I said, I didn't come back to volunteer. I came back to say I love you. And I mean that. I came back to Winged Foot in 2020 to say thanks. Because we owe everything to Winged Foot. I mean, even, you know, Bobby Christie getting to harpoon me about him beating me. That's part of my life there. And I like it. Don't worry, I can handle it. Because he couldn't play house. He got lucky.
So where was the putt? Where was the putt on 18?
The pin was kind of in the middle.
Yep.
And Dad was in the back left, I guess, if you were.
Oh.
So he had about a 40-footer, and he had the pin in back then. And the picture I have in my office is the ball is about 6 inches from the hole, and it's taken from the right of the green, so you can see the clubhouse and all the gallery, and he's going for the hat. He's doing the early call, you know. And so for me to be standing on that green that day, what were the confluence of events? You know, starts with the networks changed and all this stuff. And so I went back there to say I love Winged Foot. And all of a sudden I'm standing on that green, and I get to salute my brother Dick and my mom and dad.
That's awesome.
But you know, what's interesting about where you said that putt was, Greg Norman wasn't that far off that line.
Yeah, Dad
Remember?
was more behind the hole. Norman
Okay.
was slightly more pin high. The putt that Norman make, you couldn't make 1 out of 100. How bad was that second shot he hit?
It was, what would you say that was? He had a perfect drive, as he was a
6
great
iron,
driver.
and he hit it in the middle of those bleachers.
Yeah.
And so it was unbelievably bad shot, really, because the bleachers had to be 20 yards to the right of the green, I would think.
At least.
So it was 40 or 50 yards offline with a 6 iron, one of the great players ever. And he did it at Augusta in 86.
Same
with
thing at
4
Augusta.
iron, same
Yeah.
thing. And so isn't that funny how you guys play? Water seeks its level, boy. If you have a flaw in your swing, or you have the shot, in Hogan's case, you know, the fear of the hook stuff, it's coming, boy. The problem is you can almost feel it, you know.
Yeah.
So
Just waiting there to trap you.
Yeah, it is.
I was listening to you talk about Steve Elkington, and he told you I have to hit 3 or 4 shots that I
Yeah.
don't want to hit to win.
The thing that is intriguing, there's a lot of intriguing things about Norman, but he's such an enigma to me because he's won 90 tournaments worldwide. So how can you win 90 tournaments and be a choke artist, right? That doesn't go together.
No.
There's no way you can win that many tournaments. When Butch worked for him, Butch said something interesting. He said he didn't know how to gear down. So if Tiger had a tournament to win, or Jack had a tournament to win, they knew how to shoot for the middle of greens, and you know, you could write their name on the trophy if they had a 1-shot lead with 3 to play. It was over with. Where Greg, he said he always had just one gear, you know, and he didn't know how to gear down, or he didn't know how to change his plan with 4 or 5 holes left in a tournament when he had a chance to win. He was still trying to strangle the course. And so I think he's more of an enigma to me, because you can't win 90 tournaments, professional tournaments, and be a choker. There's just no way.
Right.
And so to think that he had the lead in 4 majors, I think in the same year, never won one of them. I don't know. He's a different one to try to figure out, I'd say.
16, he missed it left in the final round, and the pin was left, and he got it up and down, which is unbelievable. And 17, he drove, remember the pine trees over the bunkers on the right?
Yeah.
They're not there anymore,
I
but
know
he
that.
drove it up against the pine tree, had a chip left. I don't even know how he did that. Hit a 6 iron on 6 or 7 feet, and he made that putt. So he went 4-4-4, 1 putting. I don't know what he did on 15, but
Yeah.
he certainly made it hard for himself coming in. And Mickelson did the same thing, right?
I think that's the worst shot ever hit in competition, that drive on 18, because you guys have been there more than I have, but in my lifetime, I never saw anybody carry a ball into 11 East on the fly. Now, he got a little unlucky. If the merchandise tent wasn't there, he wins the Open.
Yep.
Because he's got a pretty easy shot from the. And every time I go to Winged Foot, I stand on that tee and I try to imagine the ball flight that got that ball into the 11th tee fairway on the fly. Knowing that if you miss, you can miss right and chop it out in front of the green, and the best wedge player, you know, supposedly, probably going to have no more than an 8-footer to win the Open, but he's going to a playoff. He had, you know, I've caddied in tournaments where, you know, Jay's had a 1-shot lead going the last hole. And in my mind, we have 2 chances to win the tournament now. We can either win it on this hole or win in a playoff, but don't blow both chances by being stupid, you know. But
Well, 18, the first thing you think is like, don't go left. Don't go anywhere but left.
anybody in the world that's ever played there more than
Yeah.
twice would know that.
Yeah.
Don't go left. And not only did he go left, he went 100 yards left.
Yeah.
So his miss, as we know, if he hits it out to the right, I know the rough was high, but he could chop a wedge down, hit the down slope, run it 30, 40 yards from the green. So if you look at where he was supposed to miss and where he missed, it was probably at least 100 yards, I would say.
Between them. Wow.
Unbelievable when you think about it. A guy that good.
So in that same hole, he goes and does the same thing with the 3rd shot,
Oh,
and it ends up in the left bunker, right?
yeah,
And that pin's in the traditional right center over there.
sure, yeah.
And my son Robbie's behind him. He was 12 then or something like that. And he was standing behind him. He said, Dad, he never looked at sort of hitting it at the
Up to
pro
the
shop,
left.
up to the pro shop, hit the hill, because he's sort of
Yeah.
semi-plugged, right? Never thought of that and have it trickle back down. He might have made it.
He could have, he never looked at that option. I thought the same thing, that his only shot, he could have used the slope. And the worst he would have been was maybe 10 or 15 feet, and he would have had a reasonable putt anyway to. But I always thought Phil got Montgomery off the hook, because Montgomery made double too. When Phil got him off the hook, there were a whole bunch of guys who couldn't finish, because I think I saw a scoreboard in the locker room one day or somewhere at Wingfoot, where Phil is kneeling on the ground with his head between his hands. And the only player that played 15 through 18 in even par was Ogilvy.
Right.
And he
And
got it
chipped.
up and down at 16, chipped in at 17. That ball was going off the green.
Yeah.
Because the grain goes towards Club 21, right? My dad used to say. And then and Ogilvy never got credit for the pitch he hit on 18 off that
It was
shade
awesome.
grass.
Yeah.
To nip it that good. He never got credit for that, I don't think, because of Montgomery and Mickelson in some ways took away his, they handed him the tournament, but what a weird confluence of events when you think about those last few holes.
Yeah, it's the
2000.
last half hour. Yep.
Unbelievable, really.
Yeah.
Did you, were you there in the 1974 Open?
Yeah, it's a funny Jay Haas story. There was an assistant pro named John Busick who played good in that Open.
Yes.
And in fact, after 2 rounds, I think he was in the top 5 or 6. I know what he shot. He shot 73, 73, 83, 73. But on Friday, I was standing behind the 12th green watching him. And I looked at my pairing sheet and I wanted to see who was coming up 16. And I saw this kid, Jay Haas, was coming up 16. I knew who he was, because I think he'd already won the NCAA or Walker Cup player or whatever. And the pin was in the back and he hit a wood and it rolled halfway up the hill and it came back and he made the putt for 3. And I remember after watching John, I went to the scoreboard to see if this kid made the cut, whether that was like a critical shot. And he did. He shot 78, 73, made the cut by 2, as I recall. So now we'll fast forward 4 years later. I'm caddying for him. I'd never met him. You can't win 90 tournaments, professional tournaments, and be a choker.
Thanks for joining us
Casper,
today.
Billy
We
Harmon,
really appreciate your
Double
feedback.
Indemnity,
And please
Arky,
subscribe to the
Two
show
Router,
and hit the
Claude
bell
Harmon,
icon so you get notified
Movie
of
Classics,
new episodes.
Mark Gable,
Hit them
Odd
hard
Job,
and hit them off.
Best 36 Holes.